From the heart of the Americas in Ciudad de Mexico to the minds and hearts of changemakers around the globe, welcome to the Embassy File. I'm Hector H. Lopez. This will be a deep dive into the exploration of diplomacy, innovation, and leadership in the 21st century. But before we dive in, let me tell you why this podcast. I began noticing a disturbing pattern in our geopolitical landscape. Ambassadors and representatives of nations, particularly those from the United States, are going to be increasingly marked by a combative tone, one more inclined to confrontation rather than cooperation. And meanwhile, many of my conversations with friends and colleagues throughout the Americas, especially in places like Panama and Mexico, have revealed to me a troubling complacency about the challenges we face. So I asked myself, what could serve as the bridge in these turbulent, god-awful times? Well, we need a space. We need a space that fosters understanding, collaboration, and a vision of equity, not just for elites or policymakers, but for all of us. So the Embassy File is my answer, an embajada that advocates for our shared humanity and our shared future. So this is what we're going to be up to. This week's geopolitical challenge, Trump's second inauguration. Let's begin with one of the most provocative events in recent history, Donald Trump's inauguration. This speech wasn't just political, it was a gauntlet thrown into the geopolitical arena. Like, have no doubt about it. With phrases like, "We gave it to Panama and we're taking it back," and calls to rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Come on. Trump's rhetoric has deeply unsettled Latin America. Let's unpack this a little bit for those that may not understand, and even for those of you that just want to go deeper. First, Trump's assertion about the Panama Canal raises historical, legal, and ethical questions. The canal was built through a combination of engineering and Panamanian resilience. Yes, U.S. engineering was involved. Yes, U.S. helped build it, but have no doubt, Panamanians were involved in the day-to-day building. It was solidified by the Torrijos-Carter treaties that this would be given to Panama. And Trump talks about taking it back. He's not just making a statement about geography. He's challenging decades of international law and diplomacy. It's no wonder President Mulino of Panama responded forcefully, declaring the canal is and will remain Panamanian. So that's what's going on in that part of the Americas. And meanwhile, in Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum is navigating her own response with a mix of diplomacy, resolve, and just straight up brilliance. She's emphasizing sovereignty while extending a hand for dialogue. She's kind of understanding this poker game, and she knows that this dynamic creates a fascinating contrast for people around the world. This is also a contrast between Panama's defiance and Mexico's cautious pragmatism. What does this mean for the rest of us? Do these moves reshape our collective vision of sovereignty and partnership? And that's part of the historical context that makes everything seem like a geopolitical battleground, at least as in terms of the Americas. To understand today's tensions, we need to revisit history. From the Monroe Doctrine to the Cold War, the Americas have always been at the heart of global power struggles. The U.S. has long positioned itself as the dominant force in the Western Hemisphere, often at the expense of its southern neighbors. Trump's rhetoric isn't new. It's a continuation of a pattern that long ago turned off much of the Americas from being a stronger ally. Because of this bellicose attitude, the stakes couldn't even be higher now. China's economic influence in Latin America is growing, and countries like Panama are leveraging global partnerships to assert independence. So is Mexico. So is every other Latin American country. Let me share a story from my travels through Panama. While visiting the Miraflores Lock, I spoke to a canal administrator who described to me with immense pride how he feels, and consequently how Panamanians feel, in running one of the world's most strategic waterways. His words stayed with me. He said, "This canal is more than a route. It's a symbol. It's a symbol of our sovereignty. And it's this pride that fuels Panama's resistance to Trump's claims." Beyond this, I'll share another story of one of my recent conversations with a near and dear friend in Panama. I was struck by how lightly he took the situation. Here's the thing. I don't think we should take it lightly. He said, oh, Hector, but you know what? He's bluffing. Do you actually think he's going to come in here militarily and take it over? Well, number one, he does not have to worry about re-election. And number two, I don't think it's so much about the act of taking over the canal. He sees the canal as a tool. He sees the canal as a tool to shape the economic outlook, not only of the region, but of the world. And he wants that control. See, there's deeper issues of economic exploitation going on. Let's talk about Remain in Mexico and his policy of tariffs and the designation of cartels as terrorist organizations. Each of these policies reflect a broader pattern of treating Latin America as a subordinate. There's an influencer in this space that I like to follow, and he made an interesting critique. US policies, regardless of the administration, often prioritize American corporate interests over equitable development. For example, while Trump threatens tariffs, well, these are moves that destabilize local economies, forcing more people into migration. A cycle the US then weaponizes for political gain, or at least Trump, right? But history kind of validates the point that this has happened for quite some time. Let's not also forget there's also signs of resistance and innovation. Mexico is proposing some brilliant policies. Mexico Te Abraza. This is a brand new initiative being pushed forward by the Sheinbaum administration. And Claudia is on fire. This initiative is a powerful example of how a nation can reclaim its narrative by supporting deported citizens with housing, jobs, education. Basically, Mexico flipping the script and saying, hey, migration to Mexico for Mexicanos specifically can actually be great. So that's where we are. So breaking developments and critical moment in US-Mexico relations. So in the days since I recorded this episode, a new chapter has emerged that underscores the urgency and purpose behind this podcast. The story is not merely about a denied flight or escalating numbers behind immigration enforcement. It's about the delicate and powerful dance of sovereignty, leadership, and values that define nations and the future that we hope to shape together. I want to revisit the roots of the podcast for just one moment as we reflect on something that is ongoing. The Embassy File exists because the Americas are at a crossroads. The policies and decisions of today will shape the stories we tell tomorrow. And yet, here we are, watching as President Trump's administration doubles down on a vision of the world where power is wielded with blunt force, rather than through dialogue and shared purpose. Mexico made a decision. It denied a U.S. military plane the right to land plane carrying deportees under Trump's immigration crackdown. And at the surface, it may seem like a small act of resistance. Now, to be clear, this was a plane that was bound to Guatemala, but it needed access to airspace, Mexican airspace. Behind this act of resistance, beneath it lies a deeper message. Mexico will not simply acquiesce to unilateral action, especially not from its northern neighbor. Mexico has not given an official statement. The United States has not given an official statement. However, the government has said Mexico embraces you as its immigrants return back. But this in particular is a case of immigrants that were not coming from Mexico. This is a reflection of Mexico's commitment to sovereignty, dignity, and humanity. And yet the context is anything but simple. President Trump has threatened to impose a 25% tariff on Mexican goods starting February 1st. We're still waiting to see if that's going to actually come to pass. It's a mere matter of days from now. So this looming deadline is not just a policy decision. It's a declaration of economic war against the country that not only is a close trading partner, but an integral part of the very fabric of the United States. Every tomato on an American plate, every car part in an American vehicle, there is a story that begins in Mexico. This moment demands critical analysis because it is not just about immigration. It is about the way the United States is choosing to engage with the world. The deployment of military planes for deportation flights that cost up to $852,000, because that's the price tag that is being quoted as to how much the United States had to spend to send 80 people. This speaks volumes about priorities. It raises questions. Is this truly about national security? Or is this about political theater? Is this the best use of resources in a world grappling with inequality, climate change, and conflict? Particularly in the United States, when the very president himself has been saying that the United States needs to get back to sound economic priorities. The consequences of policies built on coercion rather than collaboration could be vast. And as February 1st approaches, the world is watching. Will the United States continue to take the path of coercion, tariffs, and isolation, or will it recognize that the future of the Americas depends on mutual respect and shared solutions? What strikes me most is how these actions resonate beyond borders. President Trump's administration speaks of power, but true power does not lie in domination. It lies in influence. I once heard a statement that really stuck with me, and it was, someone who is truly powerful doesn't need to coerce anyone. That kind of leading becomes by example. So here lies a paradox. While the US flexes its muscles, who is it flexing its muscles to? It is risking alienating its closest neighbors, its closest allies. But not only that, it's risking a long-term relationship that was already coming out of a beat-up past. In a time when alliances and partnerships are more critical than ever, this approach threatens to unravel decades of work towards integration and cooperation in the hemisphere. This is why the Embassy File exists, to provide a space for reflection, analysis, for action from us. We don't really want to recount the headlines. What we're here to do is challenge the narratives and ask deeper questions about what kind of leadership do the Americas need? What kind of relationships do we want to foster between nations? And what is the legacy we hope to leave behind? As we move forward, I urge you to consider this moment not just as an isolated event, because it's not. It is a chapter in a much larger story. The actions of leaders today will echo through history, shaping not only policy, but identity, how nations see themselves and how they are seen by others. Trump's tariffs, Mexico's resistance, the use of military planes for deportations, which, mind you, have different rules about where they can and cannot go in both international airspace and foreign airspace. All of this demands our attention. It challenges us to think critically about the past being forged and the futures being built. It calls on us to remember that the Americas share not just borders, but dreams, destinies. We need to hold on to that vision of a shared future, even as we confront the complexities of the present. And let us continue to question, to engage, and we need to act. The Embassy File is not just a podcast, it is a call to conversation and to action. In fact, like I've said before, we're going to be getting together in Mexico City in April, and I want you to be a part of that gathering. This is a reminder that shaping the future of the Americas is not the work of governments alone. It is the work of all of us. And so that's how I'm ending the inaugural episode of the Embassy File with a break and a addendum recording post editing being done, because that's how fast things are moving. And where do we go from here? As change makers, we have the responsibility to challenge these narratives and create a more equitable future. It starts with us having to reflect and really ask the hard questions. How can we redefine sovereignty in a way that emphasizes collaboration over domination? What role can innovation play in addressing migration, climate change, and economic inequality? And most importantly, how can each of us contribute? It could be through entrepreneurship, advocacy, or simply staying informed in a way that's healthy. In this myriad of all sorts of information, we all have a role in shaping our shared future. Let me leave you with this thought. Diplomacy isn't just the work of governments. It's the work of people. It's conversations that we have with our friends across borders. It's the conversations we have, the values we champion, and the future we envision together. So, thanks for joining me on this journey. If you found it interesting and if this speaks to you, hey, share the episode, engage with us on social media, be a part of what we're doing, gathering in Mexico City to discuss these very topics. What projects can we build now with our current resources at our current disposal that could generate a social impact? I'd love for you to be a part of it. It's coming up shortly. I'll put information on the screen for you to see and on the descriptions down below. And until next time, let's keep shaping the future of the Americas together.